Okay, so my name is Modig Davin, and I'm a freelance journalist for publications including the New York Times and South China Morning Post. And it's a pleasure to be here with some of the most interesting independent pilot brands. And as you probably know, pilot watches have been crucial flying instruments, predominantly for navigation, but also for some other reasons that we will hear about, ever since the Wright brothers left ground in 1903. So we will talk about why they are relevant today, if they are, and how it is to be an independent brand specializing in this field. And before we start, I would like to introduce the panel. On my left, Uwe Rücker, CEO of Laco watches, celebrating 100 years next year. And Valdemar Hirvelä from the Motu watches in Finland. And Wein, president of Marathon Watches. Pleasure to have you here today. And before you introduce yourself a little bit further, Mitchell, are pilots' watches a necessary tool in 2024? Yes or no?
Yes, they are.
Valdemar?
Yes, they are.
Uwe?
Of course they are.
Okay, and now you may grab your microphones as well, and the audience will hear you. But I can tell you they all said yes, they are important tools. And if we start with a very short, like 90-second presentation of the Motu watches in Finland.
Okay, thank you. Nice to be in here. My name is Valdemar Hirvelä, and I am a designer in the Motu watches from Finland. Our company has established 2009, and we only make the pilot watches. And our co-founder colleagues is also the pilot, but we have a lot of also the friends which has a pilot licenses, and they help our design the real pilot watches. We announced the first G-meter watches 2012 from the Basel, but actually the production, our first production model started in 2016. And now we are at a point that our 60% of our production, we make the squadron watches, which are not visible in our websites or shops. And the last what we have done, it was a fighter watch, which was made by titanium, which has been designed with Finnish fighter pilots.
Wonderful, and we'll hear more about that. And Uwe from Laco, and Nicolas can move on to the Laco images there on the big screen.
Yes, I'm Uwe Rücker from Laco Uhrenmanufaktur in Germany, CEO and owner. And Laco is, as the name says, founded in 1925 as a pocket watch company with high quality pocket watches with in-house movements, and started 10 years later producing pilot watches for the German Army, for the German Air Force. And this is where our roots are for the today's pilot watches. And we still produce these kind of watches we did in the 30s and 40s, the same style and design. And we do basic watches, a little bit cheaper than that, and high quality modern watches from our time now in for pilots' use or for aesthetic use.
Fantastic. And we also have a long way guest from Canada, Mitchell Wein, president of Marathon Watches. What are you guys all about?
Hi, very nice to meet you. My name is Mitchell Wein. What we're about is we're actually military contractors that support the warfighter in an economical basis, because not only are we responsible for the pilot, but we're also responsible to the taxpayer of the country that we sell into, whether it be the Canadian government or the US government or a different department like Department of Agriculture. So our watches are really tools, and as other military instruments, we're through Mark III, Mark IV. Our basic designs come for our navigator watches, which are pilots' watches, from the the original navigation watch that was developed by Jean-Maurice Huguenin, who's sitting over there, our senior engineer, and my father, and we're very happy to actually be featured here today with these fine companies. So
And how long have you been making watches now?
My family's been making watches since 1904, and it was originally Weinstern watch, and as in many family businesses, it breaks up with a few fist fights slowly, and each brother, my great-grandfather, thought it would be great for the business to grow by putting a son in every major city and one son in Geneva. And my grandfather left the Weinstern watch in 1939, and in 1941, the war came. My grandfather had the opportunity of working with the Canadian Army, and we supplied, and we do supply many different devices and tools for the warfighter, and the navigation watch is one of them for pilots.
And on that note, what is the most important differences when we look at the pilot watches between military and civil versions?
Well, we really don't make civilian versions, but a civilian version of a watch, you can get you could embellish it, and you could make more features. But with a pilot that is operating an F-35 or an old F-17, you probably you have to make it simple to use, very clean dials and high accuracy, but it also has to endure a lot of shock, and perhaps the pilot won't be able to move around, so he's in a small compartment, so you have to take that in consideration. Also, our watches, many of them are not worn on the wrist. They're worn as part of the uniform, so we have to know what the uniform is because it comes as a kit with the uniform.
Okay. And before, when you and I spoke a little bit, Uwe, you said we are not making military versions of our watches, not at all. It's got nothing to do with what we do. Can you explain the difference there?
We don't make a difference in military pilot watches or in civil pilot watches, because a pilot is a pilot and he's always in risks of doing things wrong, and to see that a pilot has to have an instrument. And if there's a watch in the cockpit and a watch on the arm, it doesn't make a difference for a civil pilot or a military pilot. They have to be shock resistant. They have to be resistant against the fluids in a plane. They have to be easy to read. They have to be nice to handle with gloves, or when it's warm or when it's cold, see in the dark, see in the day, no glare. A lot of things that you have to consider when you produce a pilot watch for professional use. And when you do this, you find out that civil people that are not flying like these types of watches because of their design, because they're like almost like Bauhaus style, very simple designs.
And but then sometimes the military spec can even be of some simpler materials because they have to be very cost efficient.
No, there's there's a German norm, the DIN norm. We produced a watch in this norm and showed it up last year, like Zinn did and Stover did too a few years ago. And this norm describes what a watch needs to have to be a professional pilot watch when you don't have a watch in your cockpit. And this describes the material, the readability, the usability, the accuracy, everything. It's a big book.
But sometimes that can be the case for you with the big volumes.
Sorry, not used to speaking with one of these. No, so what another thing about a navigation watch is that it has to be a backup to an electronic system. So in the aircraft that are operated by military pilots, those aircraft go from 300 million to 200 to 2 billion. And sometimes systems fail, but also sometimes you have to understand that things in a computer system are reported digitally, and you have to read digits. But where you have an analog system, you could see the time that's elapsed. And there's many uses of a navigation watch. So you have to understand what a pilot's using his navigation watch for. For us, depending on what the airplane is, if it's a old C-17 aircraft, the fuel tanks are in different wings, and you have to constantly make sure that you have the timing to switch from one fuel tank to the other to balance it off. But also, let's say if your base is in Pearl Harbor, so you could also have, if you have a 12-hour bezel, you could have your home base, which is Pearl Harbor, and then your secondary base could be 2 hours earlier, which is Vancouver, or Japan, which is much later, which is 4 hours later. And, you could also set it to GMT time, because there's confusion. When you're going into an operation, you have to quickly put on that watch and get out to the plane and get performing. And that's the backup. Yeah. It's a good backup.
Yeah. And Valdemar, you also said yes, that it is an important tool for a pilot today. Why? One would think also with today's sort of more accurate electronic watches, but why is an analog mechanical watch important?
Yeah, it's the one question is that the quartz watches and smartwatches has a microchip inside it, and now a new technology can listen or have a malfunctions if they have some radio frequencies, and also when these come in EMP pulse, like a strong electromagnetic pulse, this destroyed all electronics, and then those mechanical watches still working. And the other thing is also the battery lifetime, and you never know what is your battery condition. And if you are, example, in Finland, in Lapland, in winter time, and you have a minus 40 degrees, and you use the ejection rocket sheet, and you go to snow, and temperature coming very low, and of course your battery goes lower temperature, and it could be stopped to work. And that is one thing. But I say that there is a room to quartz watches still, but real backup systems, they should be in mechanical watches.
And for you, Uwe, what is the most important aspect of a mechanical pilot watch today?
A good usability for the pilot. This is first thing. So we talk to pilots and we talk to people that use the watch. What is your need and what is your opinion to what you see when you show a new design or a new watch? This is the most important thing.
And what are the most important design details for these aspects?
Easy to read. Easy to read and easy to wear, nice to wear.
And what makes marathon pilot watches stand out when you compare to the competition? What are your unique selling points?
Well, it's not that it's unique to marathon. I think what's happening is the engineering of marathon and where our technology goes. So yes, it's very important to have mechanical devices in a cockpit. But an EMP will cause damage to a quartz movement, yes.
The electromagnetical pulse, you mean?
Yes, but in air at 35,000 feet, we use special quartz movements. Quartz movements, the technology of quartz movements has changed. We have mechanical and quartz, but for economies, when you're talking about a government buying 11,000 or 10,000 watches in one shot, the savings could be $500,000 of taxpayers' money. And at Marathon, we're responsible to the taxpayer. And as far as electronic movements go, the highly compensated FO6 movements, which we use, are extreme to plus or minus 10 seconds per year. But as well, we always have an end-of-life feature in our movements. So when the battery needs to be changed, within 3 months, it'll advise you. Your watch will tell you, just like all equipment. When you go on a flight, you're checking all equipment, making sure the gas tanks aren't leaking, the gauges are right. But also, your watch is working. It's working. 3 months out, you know, our watches last 7 years without changed battery, but it will indicate to you with 4-second increments, it's time to change your battery. And with us, because we supply soldiers, we supply militaries, it's important that just like a Glock gun or any other device, the service department on field or a soldier himself or a pilot himself can change the battery. And we have a special battery hatch that's accessible not just by, you know, a special screwdriver, it's any coin or any edge, straight edge. So like a fork or knife. So that's where we are today as a corporation.
All right. And what would you say makes the Motu stand out? And perhaps touch a little bit about how, in a concrete way, the collaboration with Pilot developed your watches.
Yes, we have the last design what we have made, the Finnish fighter pilots. We have 4 special pilots in our design group, and they have a lot of specifications for the material. Example, it need to be titanium, because if they have something like 10 G-force, if you have 100 grams clock watch in your wrist, it's 1 kilogram. And so our watch is less than 65 grams. And also there is things that the glasses must be very high connected, the very good gaskets, because when you lose the air pressure, example, high flight in 10 kilometers, they have this kind of happens that the glasses has pull out. And one thing is also we are using the screw down screws in the crown, in the same what the divers are using, because they have that kind of problems that the crown have dropped to the floor. And if there is a stem axis which is something like 2 centimeters long, and if it is going somewhere and causing the malfunction for the fighters. And therefore, example in Sweden, there was one fighter in 2 weeks grounded before they find out the part from the...
But he was not wearing a Motu. That was something else.
Yeah, it is something else. I don't say the brand. Okay. But also there is some small things that it must be thin, large, and also the big date, because they have different procedures in different date, and they need to read that in the cockpit very clearly what they need to do in different days. And an example in Hornet, they shut down the right engine in the pair day and the left engine in even days, and that is one thing.
And what have you developed over a century that has become unique for you, or at least a speciality for you?
Yeah, we started, as I said, in the 30s and 40s with a very high specialized pilot watch for the German army. And this was absolute high-tech in that time. And just a few brands could do this, like Lange und Söhne, IWC, and Laco and so. So this was very, very high class. And we did this again now with the DIN watch. I can always talk about the DIN watch, because this is so high level, because it's controlled independently, and you have to do a lot of checks and with one watch, and it's so hard to get this done. This is not easy. So it's the perfect pilot watch right now, I think, with all the limitations that you get, and this is very, very high class from Laco now.
And I would like to mention also that the Laco that we see there in the middle is the inspiration of that piece. That is an old original from the 40s. So now it has shrunk in size to, how big is the DIN watch?
It's the DIN watch is 43 millimeters, but the original pilot watch from the 40s was 55 millimeters. You can't see that on the picture so good.
Yeah.
It was a very big watch with compensated materials inside, with tungsten and some very tricky things to compensate the temperature differences between up and down.
Yeah.
And it was given to the pilot just before the start, and he has to give it back to reconfigure it afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it sounds to me that pilot watches, mechanical, are really one of the few areas where we actually still needed a mechanical watch, which has become a rather anachronistic object. And if you look into the future, Mitchell, how do you see the future of pilot watches? What will the developments be in the next decade or century?
Sure. So what I've seen through my life and what we've developed in different eras, how we've improved our watches, just like guns have improved, is by using newer materials and using younger research and constantly researching what could make the quality of the device better. And
what's the most interesting material of late?
Well, one of the most interesting materials that we've started to use in the past 30 years has been tritium tube technology, which is invented by the British from for their trim technology actually comes from Canada and Britain together, and now the kings of this micro tritium technology is here in Switzerland, manufactured by MB Microtech, and because lighting is so important in telling the time, by applying special tritium tubes to our watches really helps the luminosity. Another thing that's happening is what we learned during the first Iraq operation, the Persian Gulf operation, was to keep it light, because when you're shipping a lot of watches, keep it light. You need the strength, but you also need the shock resistance and the disposability actually of the item after being in use in combat for 12 years, if it is. What are we looking at in the future? We're looking to really a new department of the Air Force, which is the U.S. Space Force, which Canada is participating in through our developments in Montreal with the new space arm. And what we're looking at is using new, lighter, stronger, more flexible materials. So when there's an ejection from a pilot and massive changes in pull and altitude changes, that nothing flies off the wristwatch, and of course it's attached to the uniform, but it's the way we design it. We have to design our products so, as you said, we had that experience with submarines, that there can't be a piece that flies off, because that little piece could affect a piece of equipment that may damage the flight. Yeah. So that's really important. That was good. Yeah. Yeah. And
are you seeing development of existing materials, or are there new materials on the horizon?
We're constantly in development of new materials. We are working with some manufacturers of finishes that will allow the watch to be more resistant by the materials we're using that are light, and will match the coordinated colors that have to be. So we do different colored watches, one for either desert warfare, one for urban warfare, and that's we're working on different materials to make watches lighter, stronger, and more usable.
And Valdemar, when you look ahead into the future?
Yes, one thing is the the new young pilots, they are actually watch collectors. And they have a Breitling, Premote, and etc., and also the demo too. And I am very glad about that. They have many watches. And because they need to also take care of their own brand, the pilot's brand. And also when I going to, example tomorrow, when this morning, when I going to flight, I look the pilot and what kind of watch he has in the wrist.
And what was it?
I cannot I cannot keep the respect for him nowadays, but because I don't recognize that. If I recognized, then I respect it. But yes, and that is a very important thing that they are not using only in cockpit because the flight is a 25 or half an hour, but they need to use in also when they make the flight plan and when they have just in the bar and showing, they don't to tell I am a pilot. They just wearing the real one watch in the wrist. Yeah.
It's the pickup line.
Yes.
And Uwe, when you look ahead after nearly a century, what's happening in the next century?
When you take a close look at watches that are 100 years old and watches now, there's a lot of things that didn't change. They didn't change at all. And maybe there's a big break of material that changes a lot, like in mobile phones or cars or whatever. Sometimes it comes as quick as you don't imagine, and sometimes it's very, very, very slow. So it's hard to answer this question because we don't know what the future will bring. But I think a lot of new materials will come, as you said, more flexible, more light, more stiff, more. And this will make a change, but it will go slow. Every year there's a new material coming up.
Yeah, could we mention some materials for the audience that are coming, or is it still too early in the R&D process?
There are a lot of new metals because of metal printing in 3D, where you can do individual mixture of materials and combined with plastics or with ceramic. This would be a very interesting thing to see what's happening in this area.
And last but not least, and I'll start with you again, Mitchell. If you're not a pilot, why should you get a pilot watch?
Oh, well, why should you get a pilot's watch? Well, if you're not a pilot,
apart from the pickup
if you're not a pilot, there's many functions in the tool of a pilot's watch, and there's different pilot's watches that we make. The number one pilot watch is the navigation, which has a turning bezel that is 12 hours. So right now I'm in Switzerland, which is 6 hours difference than Toronto. So when I land here, I keep my watch at the normal home time, which is on the watch, and then I'll turn the turning bezel 6 hours, so I know exactly that if I'm calling my mother to see how she is, and it's noon here, I won't do the call because it's 6 o'clock in the morning. Okay. Another great thing about wearing a pilot's watch is I come from a science background, so when we do industrial timing or when we do timing, when we use a chronograph, it's an add-on, just as if you're using a stopwatch. And with our stopwatches, with our chronographs, it's easy to do it because we use decimal timing. So if I'm writing a report, and let's say it's, maybe I'm doing a centrifuge of white blood to separate the blood cells. And if it takes 2 minutes on a centrifuge machine, I could start it as a stopwatch. But in my report, instead of saying 2 minutes 45 seconds, I say 2.75 minutes. That's the decimal timing. That's what's interesting about, any watch you buy, whether it be a Breitling tachometer or different watches, there's always a use for a different watch. And I think these guys have great watches too. I collect watches because it's interesting. It's like, listen, I have a whole ruler collection. So, you know, there's different rulers. Like, you know, you have to with centimeters, imperial measurement, and, you know, pilot watches do that too.
And Valdemar, why should you get a pilot watch if you're not a pilot?
Yeah, everybody like to be a little bit pilot. And I think that for the pilot watches, there is a lot of young children who see the helicopters or planes or captain uniforms. They need, I want to be a pilot. But they are selecting in other career. But in the weekend, they wearing the pilot watches. They like to be a little bit the pilot.
Keep the dream alive.
Yes.
And Uwe?
I think it's like when you buy clothes. You have to have a collection for every purpose. And you have a t-shirt, you have a jeans, you have a shirt, you have a whatever. And you have brown shoes and you have black shoes. And if you're a watch collector, you need to have a pilot watch. There's a lot of categories of watches, but one big collection part should be a pilot watch. It's just a cool watch. It's so nice from design, always outstanding in design, and a very nice thing to have and to use.
I couldn't think of a better note to end this talk. Thank you so much for joining us on stage today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.